Before we begin, let's make one thing clear. Witches are lovely and not monsters to fear. Forget what you've heard in stories and books of terrible spells and horrid hag looks. The one being good is always the fairy, and the witch is the bad one, short, fat and hairy. The truth of the matter, if only you knew, is a witch has the power to make wishes come true. So if a witch had the choice, what would she decide? Let people be mean or find somewhere to hide? A long time before you could watch telly, a chubby prince ruled with his wobbly belly. From morning till night he would eat and he'd eat. 10 years had passed since he'd last seen his feet. It would be rude to share just how much he weighed, but his royal trousers were specially made. Permanently hungry and super wealthy, his favourite foods were really unhealthy. His dinner of choice was donut and chips, washed down with milkshake and fizzy drink sips. Not far from his castle, a witch could be found. A baker by trade, her cakes were renowned. She cooked in a cauldron, and she mixed with a spell, and she sold them to people, drawn in by the smell. Using her magic, she would make the cakes rise, so sometimes they'd grow to unbelievable size. They'd melt in your mouth or explode with a pop. The queue got so big that she opened a shop. Your flavour of choice with a wand and a waggle. The prices were fair and she liked a good haggle. So one particular day, when the shop had been busy, when a batch of doughnuts had turned out all fizzy, their flavour would change with each little bite, a mouth-watering ball of taste bud delight. So as news of them spread, the shop drew a crowd, and the wind blew the smell away like a cloud. It reached royal nostrils by way of the breeze, making him dribble and go weak at the knees. "Bring me that witch," the chubby king cursed. He stood up so quick that his underpants burst. The prince ordered his guards to go out and look as he stormed to the kitchen to fire his cook. By the time they returned, he'd built up a hunger, but he liked the fact his cook was much younger. His big belly rumbled and started to ache, and some in the village felt the earthquake. He demanded some doughnuts like he had smelt, as a bit of his belly popped over his belt. He ate them all up with a snort and a slurp. When he wanted some more, he let out a burp. The witch cooked for weeks, and the cakes just got bigger. It took a terrible toll on the poor prince's figure. To make matters worse, the prince made a law about dinner-time rules for the rich and the poor. "The nice food's for me, and you can have slop. Anyone eats before me, and their head's for the chop." There appeared no end to the prince's greed, and a gradual increase in his eating speed. So the prince got fat as his town got thinner, as he left them nothing but scraps for dinner. So as the witch watched the prince changing shape, she plotted revenge and her careful escape. She needed to hide where no eye could see, where no one could find her, not you and not me. The solution, she realised, was somewhere quite smelly, where the prince wouldn't go no not on your Nelly. And the answer came in the form of a banana skin, and the terrible stench from inside the bin. With a wave of her wand, she started to shrink, and she hid in the dustbin under the sink. The most important part of her magical spell, aside from the shrinking, was the witch lost her smell. For the downside of hiding in rubbish and junk is she started to smell a bit like a skunk. Her stinky perfume was hugely intense and likely to cause most noses offence. To style her hair and keep it all wavy, she used a small blob of 3-day-old gravy. With apple core earrings and a bin-bag dress, she still had her beauty, despite all the mess. So though lead in the bin may not sound appealing, it gave the witch space from the prince's squealing. Time to dream up the most ingenious plan to rid the whole land of this terrible man. By using his greed, the town she would save, and she'd teach him a lesson and make him behave. So as the prince slept, she started to mix with some of her favourite magical tricks. A cockerel crowed as she finished her baking. She was just in time, for the prince was waking. The prince called a meeting and stood on the stage, screaming and shouting and snorting with rage. "Who baked this cake?" he started to yell. "It was left in my castle with a terrible smell. I found it this morning on my kitchen table, with a mixing bowl and an eat me label." The crowd stared out blankly, without any sound. "Well, no one will eat then, until they are found." All of a sudden, the cake smell got stronger, and the prince couldn't wait, not 1 minute longer. He ate the whole cake before you could blink. Then all of a sudden, his skin turned quite pink. The crowd looked amazed at this curious sight, when suddenly the prince began to lose height. His legs got much shorter, and his body spread out, and a curly tail grew, and his nose became snout. The last thing to go was the shape of his ears. His change was complete, and greeted with cheers. For covered in clothes was a pig in a crown, much to the delight of most of the town. The Prince Pig was taken to a family farm. He lives in a pigsty and still has no charm. He can still be grumpy, and sometimes he snaps, but he never eats first now, and he only eats scraps. So, there might be a witch in your kitchen bin. So do take some care when putting things in. Bin Witch they call her, for obvious reasons. She lives in the bin through all 4 seasons. So always eat nicely, make sure you're polite, and watch for big cakes left out overnight.
That was great.
Do you like that?
Mm-hmm.